Hi, today I want to talk about learning a language in 1 month. If you enjoyed these videos, please subscribe, click on the bell to get notifications, and by all means join me at Link to Learn Languages. So, we regularly see blog posts, videos where people provide advice on how to learn a language in a given period of time, 1 month, 3 months, 6 months. And typically they have a range of tips and tricks and hacks that will enable you to learn a language more quickly. I am skeptical. I'm skeptical because I believe what Manfred Spitzer said, and that is that the brain will learn. The brain is a learning machine. It's a pattern creating machine, but the brain learns slowly. I don't believe that the brain learns quickly. But you can Google, and it's interesting to do because obviously those of us who are interested in learning languages, we want to see how other people learn. We want to, if there are useful tips and hints, then obviously we want to, learn from these people. And there are things that work for some people that don't work for other people. And you'll see that some of the suggestions are, just get out and talk to people. Well, it's very difficult to do that if you don't first have the language in you. You have the more traditionalist person who says you must get a good grammar book and a good dictionary. And I don't find that necessary either because sure, you'll probably get yourself a grammar book or a starter book and you'll read through these explanations and it won't make much sense. Yes, you have to refer back to some kind of grammar explanation, but you can do that at any time. It's easily available via Google. And you'll become curious about certain aspects of the language after you've had enough exposure to the language. And that's the way we design Link. And you can start reading, you look up words, you start to gradually explore and piece together how the language works. Then you become curious and you look up the grammar. Some of the other suggestions, I noted some of them. Yes, they recommend there are a lot of apps out there, Duolingo and Link, of course, and Babbel and Busuu. And however, the fundamental process is still one that takes time. Whether you are using these apps or not, whether you have a good dictionary or a good grammar book or not, you still have to have the language come in you. Some people suggest, memory techniques. Again, some people, if you enjoy, memory techniques, I must confess that I don't. I'm not prepared to invest the time in memory techniques, but some people are. Because again, I believe that, learning some words in isolation, even using memory techniques, is no substitute for this massive input, reading and listening, which is going to allow my brain to gradually get familiar with the language. Some people suggest you should have these measurable goals and realistic goals. And I think that's a good thing, but I've always found that language learning is something that's driven by your motivation, and some days you're keener than other days, and the idea that you should decide that every day at 10 o'clock in the morning or 6 or whatever that I'm going to do this, that, and the other, it can be part of a strategy if you're that way inclined. It's not a condition, and I don't think it's necessarily going to move you faster to this goal of learning the language in 1 month or 3 months. One of the suggestions was that you can actually jump from B1 on the European framework to C2 by doing this, that, or the other. You don't jump in language learning. You certainly don't jump from B1 to C2 because actually that's a long, long way. And that's like almost, I would say, years. To be C2, you have to be living where the language is spoken. You have to be using it a lot. You have to have done a lot of reading. You have to have put in a lot of time over a long period of time. You can't just jump because you start speaking. If you don't have the vocabulary and you don't have the comprehension, you aren't going to jump to sort of beyond fluency as it was described. Of course, we have things available to us today. We can find a tutor online. We can have Skype conversations. We can do all of those things, but we can't do those if we don't understand the language, if we don't have vocabulary. And obviously, the closer the language is to one we know, the easier it is to learn. But to suggest that one shortcut to learning more quickly is to find cognates. Cognates are very similar words in another language. Well, that works if you're learning a language which has a lot of cognates. But if you're learning a language that has no cognates, it doesn't really help very much. Generally speaking, the more recognizable vocabulary there is in the new language, the faster you're going to learn. Another argument that's put forward is, learn the most important 1,000 words, 500 words, learn the important words up front. In my experience, first of all, having the most important 500, 1,000 words is not going to help you if you get into a genuine, meaningful conversation with someone, because the vocabulary will go well beyond those words. And unfortunately, frequency in vocabulary declines very, very quickly. So you're still going to have to chase those less frequent vocabulary items at some point if you want to be genuinely comfortable in the language. And those very frequent words, they're going to show up anyway. You don't really have to focus on learning those. They'll come at you so often if you're doing a lot of listening and reading that those are the ones that will be the easiest to learn. You're still going to have to pursue the less frequently used words. Another thing you hear is how to sound like a native. I think if we listen a lot, if we are attentive to the language, if we are motivated to sort of imitate the natural native pronunciation, we'll get better, but we may not ever sound like a native, and it doesn't matter. In fact, it's interesting. I was watching a golf tournament, and they interviewed this golfer from Mexico. I can't remember his name, but he had a Spanish accent, but he spoke excellent English. Sometimes, if you speak very well and you have a bit of your native accent, that almost gives your English or whatever language, if you're learning another language, a little bit of charm. Whereas, on the other hand, if you exaggerate sort of the native twang, but you don't have the use of words and the control of the language that would normally match that level of pronunciation, it may not make a good impression. So, I guess what I wanted to say is, in this idea of studying effectively, make sure you expose yourself to a lot of the language. Let the brain take its time to learn the language. The brain will learn, but it takes time. And don't put pressure on yourself to learn it in 1 month, 3 months, 6 months, nor is it even certain what it is you hope to achieve in 1 month, 3 months, 6 months. Because if it's a new language, you have no concept of how much there is in that language. And typically you'll discover the deeper you get into it that there's just more and more of it there, which, if you're enjoying the language, is a delight and not sort of something you want to get past as quickly as possible. So there you have it. Can you learn a language in a month? I don't think so.